Wednesday, and the word for you today, our third day, and anchors for your soul. We've talked about the presence of God. We've talked about God's plan and purpose in our life. And now we're looking at God doing what he says that he will do. Acts chapter 27, verse 25 says, "So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me." This is Paul. Paul's on a ship with these there's 277 of them on this ship. And they're in a storm that's threatening to smash the ship and drown everybody aboard. And Paul says to them, have courage, for God said that everything is going to be okay. So Paul could encourage the men in the middle of a storm because God had given him a promise. What promise had he given him? Well, first of all, he told him that he would go to Rome. So Paul knew, I can't drown because God said I'm going to Rome. If I drown, I don't make it to Rome. And the second thing is that the angel of God told Paul that none of the 277, Paul's included in that group, none of them would be lost in the storm. So Paul could with confidence tell them it's going to be okay. That's exactly what happened. The boat was lost. The cargo was lost. They were shipwrecked on an island, but they were all spared. And you know what? Paul made it to Rome, just as God had said. So how do we know that we can trust God's promises? Well, John chapter 14, verse 29 says, Jesus is speaking. He says, I have told you before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he said, I'm telling you what's going to happen, so later on, you'll understand. Did you know that Jesus, the coming of Jesus and his life, fulfilled over 300 promises that God made in the Bible about his coming into the world? What are the promises? Well, God told Adam and Eve that they ate from the tree of the good of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would die. That's exactly what happened. God told Noah he was going to send a flood, and he sent a flood. God told Abraham and Sarah, even though they were physically beyond having children, he told them they would have a child. They had a child. God told David, the youngest of his family, that he would be a king. He was king. God told Zechariah and Elizabeth, even though they were beyond childbearing age, that they would have a child. And they did. God told the people that Jesus would die on a cross, that he would be buried, but he would come back to life. And he did. God told the disciples to wait in Jerusalem for the coming of the Holy Spirit. And he did. You can just go through the Bible and you can go hundreds of promises that things God said, and every single one of them have happened, except the things that just couldn't have happened yet. Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, Jesus says, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age. God's presence with us can be an anchor for our soul. God's plan and purpose for our life can be an anchor for our soul. And God's promises, things he promises us, that can be an anchor. We can rest assured because he told us by putting our faith and trust in Jesus that we would have everlasting life. And those who reject Jesus would have everlasting death or punishment. If he fulfilled everything else he said, why would we not believe him when he says that? See, faith for my deliverance. Faith if I'm in a bad spot and I pray for faith that I would be delivered is really not faith in God. Faith means whether I'm delivered or not from that circumstance, you know what? I will still have faith in God. God, you are able to rescue me from this problem. But God, even if you don't, you're still my God. That is faith. That is faith. And that kind of faith rests on his presence, his plan and his purpose for our life, and his promises. Doesn't mean things are always going to turn out well. means we trust Him regardless of how things work out. Have a good day.